present to everyone.
And do I have to use it within that frame, or can I use it in
In the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
I think you can go right in here.
Excellent. Okay.
I think we're going.
Okay.
All right.
Then we'll go. Good morning. Sorry, thank you for your patience while we figure out the technical things. We'll go ahead and get started though. My name is Anna Lee, and I teach at NNU, and I teach at Boise State. I've adjuncted starting at NNU for about 12 years on and off now. I teach English classes primarily. I started doing comp and grammar and usage. So if you see an error in my PowerPoint, feel free to point and heckle. That's totally fine. They still happen occasionally, even when you teach people not to do that. But nowadays I teach technical communication primarily, and I do that at Boise State and here at NNU, both online and in face-to-face classes. So one of my topics of research that I got into a little bit as I was working on my master's degree at Boise State was giving presentations and using presentation technology effectively. And I felt like through some of that research that I really went, oh wow, I have been giving some poor presentations in my life. And I feel like I've got some tips and things that might be helpful for you as instructors that are trying to use this kind of technology in your classrooms in a way that is effective. So that is what we are going to talk about during this session. So first, I feel like we have to establish why this is important. Now, the fact that you all came to this session tells me that you use this technology, or that you want to use this technology, or that you like it, or that you hate it. So how many of you have taught a class in some way using PowerPoint or a different presentation software? Okay, most everybody. How many of you have seen or sat in a class or a conference or a lecture where they use PowerPoint? Everyone. How many of you have sat in a lecture or class where they used PowerPoint poorly? Okay. Where you thought to yourself, maybe, yeah, I may have fallen asleep, or why don't they just give me the slides and I can go home and save myself an hour of time and read the slides at my leisure, or something like that. So you know what, I can tell you from a student's perspective, because I teach this kind of stuff in my tech comm classes, that they have also sat in poorly presented PowerPoint presentations in their classes, and they've done it a lot. I always get a few horror stories. I put on the, okay guys, we're going to talk about this, and it's going to be about your other professors, and that's okay, because what happens in this English class stays in this English class. But tell me some examples that you've experienced, and that's a good place to start, because we all have experienced, or maybe produced, I know I have, a poor presentation, where we have done some things with PowerPoint that have not supported student success, that have not helped us teach our classes in an effective manner. So I think that's why we need to think about this. And there's also a lot of talk out there about this subject. So I'm going to actually take a minute and at least read part of this article called "Let's Ban PowerPoint in Lectures. It Makes Students More Stupid and Professors More Boring." So let's see if I can actually get to it here. And I think that this may resonate and be a good conversation starter for some of us. So I'm going to actually read it to you since it's not popping up there on the screen. Any university teacher who does not harbor a painful recollection of a failed lecture is a liar. On one such occasion, I felt early on that I had lost the students entirely. Those who hadn't sunk into a comatose oblivion were listless and anxious. Ungracefully, I threw myself even deeper into my PowerPoint presentation to save myself from total ruin. Years later, I can still hear myself reading aloud the bullet points from the overhead and see myself turning around to the students to sell these points to them. Luckily, I have no recollection of what the students thought of it, but my most painful memory is the experience of boring myself. When that happens, it's time to change one's ways. That's why I've led a move to ban PowerPoint from lectures. There are a host of possible reasons for a lecture going wrong: a badly planned course, inadequate preparation, feeling uninspired on the day, disengaged students, a crowd that's too big, a poorly designed auditorium. To this bulleted list of catastrophes comes PowerPoint. The physical face-to-face lecture is potentially a complex and open event where students, the readings, and the lecture, and a case-based or theoretical problem interact. A PowerPoint presentation locks the lecture into a course that disregards any input other than the lecturer's own ideas of the lecture conceived the day before.
It cuts off the possibility of improvisation and deviation and the chance to adapt to student input without veering off course. This is usually what makes such presentations so painfully boring. While it quickly becomes evident to the audience where the presenter is going, he or she has to walk through all the points while the audience dreams that the next slide might be more interesting. So not fit for teachers, next heading here. Yet, to be interesting and relevant in a lecture, teachers need to ask questions and experiment, not provide solutions and results. Unfortunately, PowerPoint is designed to provide just that. Originally from Macintosh, the company that designed it was bought by Microsoft. After its launch, the software was increasingly targeted at business professionals, especially consultants and busy salespeople. Let me tell you, from working in marketing, it's terribly misused in that realm as well. But during the 1990s, it was adopted more generally by corporations as it became part of the Microsoft Office package, which explains the executive summaries, one-liners, ubiquitous deliverables, and action plans. Its way into academia was helped by the increased pressure on faculty to deliver more teaching and the increased demand from a more diverse student population to be more concretely guided through the jungle of knowledge. As it turns out, PowerPoint has not empowered academia. The basic problem is that a lecture isn't intended to be selling bullet-pointed knowledge to students. Rather, they should be making the students encounter problems. Such a learning process is slow and arduous and cannot be summed up neatly. PowerPoint produces stupidity, which is why some, such as the American statistician Edward Tufte, have said that it is evil. Of course, new presentation technologies like Prezi, SlideRocket, or Impress add a lot of new features in 3D animation, yet I'd argue that they only make things worse. A moot point doesn't become relevant by moving in mysterious ways. The truth is that PowerPoints are actually hard to follow, and if you miss one point, you are often lost. On top of this comes the ambivalence of what's in those bullet points. In my presentations, the text on the slides are really just my private and often hastily written down thoughts. Unlike my other published and peer-reviewed work, no one has seen or criticized my PowerPoints. Well, that's true for me. Yet the students perceive my bullet points as authoritative, and they would often quote them in their assignments instead of going through the toil of finding the meaningful points in the real text from the course. So while successfully banning Facebook and other use of social media in our master's program in philosophy and business at Copenhagen Business School, we've also recently banned teachers using PowerPoint. Here we are in sync with the U.S. Armed Forces, where Brigadier General Herbert McMaster banned it because it was regarded as a poor tool for decision-making. We couldn't agree more, although we do allow lecturers to use it to show images and videos as well as quotes from primary authors. Apart from that, teachers write with chalk on the blackboard or markers on the whiteboard. Contrary to what PowerPoint allows, the chalk and blackboard enable us to write down points from the students alongside and connect to the points we ourselves develop. Most universities are actually defending Microsoft's monopoly by stealth by architecturally letting the projector and the PowerPoint take precedence over other technologies such as the Blackboard. Of course, lifting the uneasy burden of PowerPoint off the teacher's shoulders places higher demands on planning. Yet, while our master's program, we as teachers have a clear plan in terms of what should happen every minute of the lecture, the exact content should remain variable and open-ended in order to support interaction. And he goes on, and I'm not going to take the time to finish this. There's just a couple more points that he makes, but basically it sums up the article. But that is a very strong opinion about the tool of PowerPoint. And I think it is definitely a valid opinion. And I think there's things that we can relate to that he's talking about. But I don't think it's the only opinion. And I think that there is some value to this tool. And if we use it correctly, or if we just use it in different ways maybe than we're used to, we can still use it effectively for teaching. And here, other people think the same thing. Here's another article in the same place on the conversation that is called, "It's Not PowerPoint's Fault, You're Just Using It Wrong." And I think that gets to the idea of throwing that baby out with the bathwater when it comes to a presentation technology like PowerPoint. So I think that PowerPoint can promote student success, and it can also showcase our knowledge as instructors instead of taking the place of us as instructors for the students. And so during this presentation, we are going to go over these main points about this. We're going to consider the purpose of presentation software and how we've maybe missed the mark of what this technology is supposed to do. And if we use it in the way that it's intended, it can be more effective. I'm going to tell you about something I call the claim support method. This isn't totally original. There's different versions of this, but I'll go over that. And then we're going to talk about creating successful visuals, which I think is the place where it becomes the most challenging to use PowerPoint or Prezi or any of these presentation softwares effectively, is we're not designers, we're teachers in our various disciplines. So how do we do that effectively? And then we're going to talk about some tips for designing PowerPoint so that they are better teaching aids and better learning aids for our students. And then we're going to talk about how these concepts can be applied if you're teaching face-to-face or if you're teaching online. So that is where we are going. So I think that it's important that we get on the same page about what the purpose of a technology like PowerPoint is in the educational environment. And I think some of us, me included, have used it in ways that it's not necessarily intended. I see PowerPoint as a visual aid to what I am teaching, not as the lesson itself. And I think that's the difference. A lot of times, as I'm preparing a lesson, I might use PowerPoint more like my lesson plan, where I have put all the things on here that I think I need to remember and mention when I'm teaching a course. And these are not things that the students necessarily need to know. And as that article suggested, it can become this place where I've just spit out all of my thoughts without thinking too much about the organization. But they're on there, they're on bullet points, so the students think they need to write them down and be responsible to remember all of those things. And I think if we change that thinking a little bit and we consider this as a visual aid, where I am a necessary, as the instructor, a necessary component to the understanding of the material, that it changes the way that PowerPoint's used. And I like this definition because of visual aid that I found, because it talks about film strips. And this kind of cracked me up because I'm like, boy, if the dictionary is behind the times on what kinds of visual aids we're using in our classrooms, it's no wonder that we aren't really sure how to use even an old technology like PowerPoint effectively, because apparently we're all using film strips as our main teaching tool and as the primary example, the dictionary definition of a visual aid. But if you think about what you put on the screen as needing to be visual, not just another way to provide the information that's in the textbook, then I think it changes the way that you use the technology. So I think we do have to be aware of the negatives of PowerPoint, and we are mostly aware of these negatives, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of really terrible PowerPoints being made. So even if we're aware of them, we don't always acknowledge that. A lot of times because it takes a lot of time to make PowerPoints that are well designed. But how many of you have seen a slide like this sometime or other in a presentation? Of course, this is smaller than it would be, but not that much smaller than it would be in a presentation. I showed this to my mom, who works, she's a nurse, she's a diabetes educator, and she goes to tons of medical presentations. And I showed her this, and she goes, oh, that's what every slide looks like in every presentation that I've ever been in. She's like, it's complete nonsense. She's like, you can't read them, you can't understand them, you can't get the concept. And we know this in our minds, but yet somehow we get into the trap of sometimes creating these things. So things I feel like we need to be aware of and avoid. Poor design. And this is obviously a great example of a poorly designed slide that isn't easy to read or understand. We over-rely on our PowerPoints. We use these and it allows us to take something that we've taught before, throw it up and just go with it instead of perhaps properly preparing for a lesson or a presentation that we need to give to our students. We put too much text on them. Obviously, cardinal sin of PowerPoint presentations is loading them with text so that students spend all their time trying to copy down every word rather than listening to what you're saying. Oftentimes, as the article again mentioned, they're just a train of thought organization of our thoughts. They aren't thought through, organized, or designed intentionally to get a specific key idea across to students in a way that they can remember and understand and that requires their thought. And they also can cause a lack of interactivity if you just rely too heavily on them and feel like they're the main thing that's keeping you going through your presentation. So no, we don't want to do these things. We want to move away from them. But it offers a lot of positives as well. So when you have a slide like this one that is very simple, very clean, easy to read, especially if it was full size, I think that they can be a lot more helpful. Positives that PowerPoint can enhance understanding by providing a visual to support what it is that you're trying to teach.
It's a great way to display visuals, and sometimes of complex information that otherwise, if we were to show it on the screen in its original program, for example, maybe too much information. We can use the PowerPoint to control and display visuals in a way that can enhance understanding. It can appeal to multiple learning styles for those students that need more than just auditory learning, where they struggle to listen and get everything out of a lecture. This gives them something to latch onto, especially if we make it visual, not just another text-based tool. It can archive your teaching materials, and I think that's a positive. Whether your slides are great or not so great, there's still a way for you to retain what you've taught and to use it and to update it and to have version control over the information that you've taught and will teach again. And it's applicable in multiple platforms. I think that PowerPoint is a great, accessible, readily available tool that's pretty intuitive that we can use in face-to-face classes and when we teach online. So those are reasons I think that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just want to try to do it a little bit better. So one method that I've learned and that I've written about and that I've tried to practice is something I call the claim support method. And you may have seen this in other places, something like claim evidence or various things like that. So this is not the most original thing ever in the world, but I've taken this from various types of research and tried to throw it together and something that is useful for me, so hopefully it'll be useful for you. So in this kind of method, what you're wanting to do on a slide is rather than have a topic and a bunch of bullet points, which PowerPoint tends to guide us into by the way that it's designed, instead you want to make a claim of some sort about what you're trying to get across on a given slide. One claim, one idea, and research suggests that if you put that in a complete thought, and even go so far as to put it into a sentence and punctuate it like a sentence, that it is much easier for your audience to understand and to grasp because it's a complete idea. Okay, so they know what you're trying to say. So that is a good way to do your headers instead of your typical, introduction and point one or whatever, just single word types of topic headers. And then you use the main part of your slide as a place to provide evidence in support of the claim. So whatever type of visual is going to explain, is going to demonstrate, is going to illustrate what it is that you're trying to teach on that slide. So this is that claim support model. Sentence case claim is your header, some sort of single piece of simple, clear, visual evidence that's strong and that's accurate, because you can get into trouble with graphs and things when you try to simplify them. So you want it to be simple and strong and accurate and just one visual point that you're making. So how do we do that? That's hard, right? Because it means you have to think of a visual. Instead of having all of that knowledge in your mind where you're just typing it out in bullet points because you know what you're meaning to say, you have to think of how do I illustrate my idea effectively within the tool of PowerPoint. Well, first of all, sometimes PowerPoint is not the tool, okay? Sometimes Prezi is not the tool. Sometimes you need to say, I don't need slides, I need to do a physical demonstration. I need to write on the chalkboard. Or I need to write on the chalkboard for some part of the presentation, and that's fine in this format. It gives you plenty of opportunity to provide other types of evidence to support that same claim, or not to use a PowerPoint at all. But when the PowerPoint is the appropriate choice, you've got to come up with ways to create these visuals. So I think that's the hardest part, and this is where I spend tons of time if I'm designing a presentation, and that is, okay, I gotta think. This means I have to organize my information in a way that allows me to come up with a visual that actually helps me teach what I'm trying to teach. And it isn't pretty, doesn't matter if it's, entertaining, it matters if it gets the point across. And that's really hard work. But when you go through that work, you suddenly have something that lasts you a lot longer, that makes a lot more sense, that's a lot more organized and easier for your students to understand, and really, truly serves as a visual aid for what you are trying to teach. So I have some tips and ideas for creating successful visuals that have worked for me. And the first thing I always try to do is figure out what my options are. Okay, sometimes it's PowerPoint, sometimes it's not. Assuming you want to come up with a visual that's going to work on the screen, what kind of visual can I use that appropriately conveys the idea and supports what I'm trying to teach? And this is where you have to get into your discipline-specific knowledge, okay? And there are a lot of options for great visuals. And so sometimes you just have to stretch your mind a little bit to come up with what they are. And we'll talk about a few of those. But there's tables, and there's graphs, and there's charts, and there's screenshots, and there's photographs, and there's illustrations, and all sorts of things that work great on the screen. And that, again, you can actually control sometimes within this type of tool that you may not if you were just going to stick an Excel document on the screen, for example. Sometimes that's way too much information, and taking a screenshot and blowing that up and pointing at things actually makes it a lot more successful, which is a great usage of PowerPoint. So you got to weigh your options. Is PowerPoint the best thing? And if it is, what can I do? Then I always suggest next that you create your own visuals anytime that you have the ability to do so. And that's a little bit stressful if you don't fancy yourself a designer or very good at technology, but there's a lot of easy tools out there that can help you create a lot of different kinds of visuals and that can do things that are not that hard. For example, take a photo with your phone of the thing that you're trying to show. So maybe you need to get a close-up shot of some sort of part of the device that you need to show to your class, and it's not convenient to bring that into the class and show someone physically or take the students to it. Take your own photo of it. Blow that up, point at things with arrows, and it's a really easy thing that we're all capable of doing to use a visual. Take a screenshot, also very simple, that you could do to create your own visuals. There are also programs available, free programs online that are great for creating visuals. One that I like to use is called Canva, so that's C-A-N-V-A, canva.com. And that is a great place for creating visuals. You can make all sorts of things. There's free graphics in there that you can use and download. In fact, I just made a little thing for my sister-in-law's bridal shower out of Canva. But I made a little design, I put a little flower on it, used some fonts, downloaded it, printed it. It was great. You can get lots of things out of Canva that are awesome. Another one, if you want to get into creating infographics and things like that that you might want to use in this format or other formats is PictoChart. If you've never used PictoChart, it's a good one as well. And so these are free online design tools that are pretty intuitive, that are a great place to create your own visuals. Then, of course, use the tools in the technology that you're using. And I like to use PowerPoint as opposed to Prezi or Google Slides or some of these other types of software because it, to me, offers the most robust tools for creating your own visuals and things like that. And it's so readily available. Obviously, we all have access to PowerPoint in some place or other. So that's why I prefer PowerPoint, is because the tool's available. This is the icon for the Smart Art feature in PowerPoint, and I use it all the time. It can be, if you don't use it correctly, just like anything, it can not add very much value, but it offers all sorts of ways, and you'll see one on the next slide, of creating a visual way to present information. So even if you're just going to do a list, if you put it in a Smart Art graphic, a lot of times that can help you show relationships between information and in ways that are much more visual than just text on the screen. So I use that feature all the time. I think it's great. It adds a little bit of color, and it's really, really easy to use. Other things within PowerPoint or within other Microsoft Office programs, of course, you can create your graphs, you can create your charts, you can create all sorts of simple features like that that are easy to import and use. So take advantage of those tools that are offered by the program. Just try to use them with your knowledge and information to use them correctly so you don't add confusion to the situation. And then if all else fails, you got to go out and find existing visuals out there in the world. And this is the part that gets a little bit problematic, but that I always fall under and crawl under the safety net of, I'm a teacher, I'm not making any money off of this. I am just trying to teach students within the confines of a classroom where I'm not sharing these slides outside, or I'm not going to be in any way trying to make money or advance myself based on this information. And so when I am just purely teaching in the confines, especially of a face-to-face classroom, then I definitely go find visuals online and use them as needed. And you just have to be careful about copyright issues when you do this, which is why I always go through all the other steps first before I go elsewhere. Google Images is wonderful. A million different kinds of things out there that can help you illustrate the points you're trying to make within the context of the classroom. I can't go there when I'm working in marketing. Okay, I can't go out and just use things online to help me, but when I am teaching and it's very limited the scope of who's using it, then I go that route if I need to. Other places that you can go to find existing visuals in a university setting. The marketing department. I worked in marketing. If someone came to me and said, hey, can I get a logo for my PowerPoint presentation? I would have been like, yes, of course you can. Please let me give you one that looks good. And we can get that in your slide set if you need to do some university branding in your slides. They may have other types of stock photos available for you that the university has created and owns and is happy to share with you. If you need photos that are even of university students where those permissions have already been signed off on and you can use those in your classrooms because they're getting used in publications. So that's a great way to go. Yes?
Yeah, I do that. But I use them quite a bit. The place that Microsoft directs you, if you click on, if you follow that menu selection.
Okay, yeah.
It actually comes with a little bug on the bottom for most of the pictures that you're looking at. It says that they're open source.
Yeah.
And so I always include the little bug on the little
exactly
on the bottom.
So you can go and help yourself out, especially if you know you're going to use your presentation in a broader setting than the classroom, so that you feel really good about where you're getting photos. And you know what? Sometimes if I see an image that I just need to use because it's a good illustration and it has like written across it the watermark of the place, I don't care. I leave the watermark on there. I just want to kind of get the idea, right? So the watermark is giving credit. Again, this is all within the confines of an educational institution, and I'm very cautious, especially if it's going to be an online class where that may go beyond my face-to-face classroom. I'm cautious there. But there's lots of ways to find images that are yours that you can use because somebody else has already taken care of the copyright issues for you. And your university is a great place to do that. Or your department. Sometimes your department has access to things like graphs and charts and information that would be helpful to you. Or you have some students in maybe not your department, but another department that have access to tools that they can create images for you. So say you need some sort of blowout diagram of a part of something, you might go to the engineering department and say, hey, can someone create this for me? And that can be a good way to try to grab things that you need, depending on what you need. But that is a great tip.
Yeah, it's the easiest. It's actually easier than a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah, just going straight out.
It's a place to go. It's most of them have
the open source, so you already know and you're good to go. So these are not an exhaustive list of ways to get and create visuals, but it's just intended to help you think through how you, even if you're a little nervous about coming up with effective visuals on your slides and going to this really visually based version, this is just a good process to go through to try to come up with those. So then you got to think about not just the slides themselves, but the design of the presentation as a whole, and if it is doing everything that it can to help you effectively teach your content. Okay, and so here are some tips, and here's an example of one of the Smart Art graphics. Okay, so I just grabbed my, try not to let them get too colorful, but man, when it's just sitting there alone on a white background, it's not too overwhelming, right? So that's one of the first things that I always choose when I'm designing a presentation, is I just pick a white background. Forget about the PowerPoint presentation templates that are provided for you in PowerPoint. Skip that. Just use a white background. Again, I'm not an artist. I'm not trying to be an artist. I'm not trying to go for beautiful. I'm trying to go for functional. And for me, a white background is, one, the easiest for people to read. White background with black text is the most easy for all of your audience members, regardless of their vision capabilities, to read. So why not just go with that? The other benefit I find with the white background, as opposed to even a very light background, is that if I am using an image that is, say, a JPEG, and I want to stick it on the screen, I'm going to have a white box around it. And that, to me, always looks just a little bit less professional.
And I don't want to take the time to figure out how to remove the white box, even though I've had students give presentations in my class about removing white boxes around JPEG files. That's too complicated for me. But if I have it on a white background and I have that file type, that's still going to look good on the screen, it looks good. Like the very first image that you saw on this of the girl going like this. Okay, if this had been a dark background, there would have been a big white box around the girl going like this, right? And so I just save myself time and energy by always choosing a white background. Some people say that's boring. And I say, I don't care. I'm not trying to entertain. I'm trying to teach you something. So that is one design tip that I always choose. I always use an orienting footer in my slide sets. How many of you put a page number, a slide number on your slide sets if you create slides? A couple people? I always do. And I like to put the date for the sake of archiving when the presentation was given. I like to put the name of the presentation in case I change it up or use slides from it to build some other sort of presentation. But the slide number, I think, is really an easy and critical thing to do if you don't do it already. And here's why. So when we get to the end of this presentation and I say, hey, does anyone have any questions? You don't have to remember what was on a slide for me to go back and be able to show everyone and to reference it and talk about it. You just say, hey, on slide 9, I disagree with you. I think you should have added this, and it makes it much simpler. And so if you're teaching, this is something you can tell your students too. Hey, I'm gonna talk to you for a while, but if you have a question, jot it down, write down the slide number, and we'll go back and we'll talk about it more. And so it's a really easy way to make your presentation a much more functional interactive tool than it would be when you spend all this time trying to figure out, or people give up and don't ask a question because it's embarrassing to try to describe what it was they saw that they weren't clear on. So it's just a super easy way to make your slide set easier to navigate for you and for your audience. I try to avoid visual noise as much as possible. What's visual noise? Too much going on. Just like if we were in this classroom or a classroom that we've probably all been in with a bunch of talking students all at the same time. You can't take in all of the conversations at once. And you can't visually take in too much information at one time. So in a presentation particularly, it's important to keep things very, very simple and avoid visual noise. And I think we know that because we've experienced it as audience members, but sometimes we don't do it when we create presentations. And we forget what it's like to not actually know the information that's being shared before it's shared, as the audience doesn't. We know this information that we're talking about. Our audience does not. So when we put too much information out there, it's very, very challenging for them to take it all in the amount of time that they're given to take it in your typical presentation. So the simpler, the better, in my opinion. And that, again, goes back to the white background, helping me to just put all the focus on whatever the image is that I'm trying to provide and keeping that simple. I always choose a sans serif font for my presentations. This is a sans serif font. A sans serif font has no little feet on the ends of the letters. Times New Roman would be a serif font. Some research shows that sans serif fonts are easier to read on screens than serif fonts. So I always use it in PowerPoint. And part of that reason is because your something in print is a lot higher resolution than something on the screen. So even though a little foot on a letter is very simple, I'm trying to go for absolutely the easiest thing for the audience to take in. And if just choosing a font like Calibri, that is the default font, makes that just a teeny bit easier for my audience to understand and take in quickly, then that's what I do. So I always choose a sans serif font. And that's something that we don't necessarily always think about, our font choices, right? But I think they can just add to the overall ease of use when you take into account those details, which don't take any time, by the way, to do. They just add to the overall effectiveness. And then finally, I always try to use an advanced organizer. And this is a concept that comes out of educational theory, but I kind of think of it in twofold ways. So an advanced organizer within a presentation is a slide, if I'm using a PowerPoint, a slide that helps me connect from an audience's prior knowledge to the information that I'm going to present in this presentation. So in this presentation, the slide with the girl going like this was my opportunity to establish who uses PowerPoint, who doesn't, what your experiences have been with this topic before I launch into new information or what might be new information for you as the audience.
So I try to do this in all of the PowerPoints that I use in a teaching setting. And it's also a way to tell your audience where you're going in the presentation. So the next slide after the girl going like this was my outline of the presentation. Now some people might say, why are you giving us an outline? This is not that long. But I don't know about you, but when I sit in a presentation, I like to know when it's going to be over. I want to know where I'm at. How many of you read on a e-reader? How many of you would rather read a real book? Okay, I read on the e-reader all the time. I would rather read a real book, and here's why. I hate not knowing where I'm at in the book. I hate the fact that this could be Moby Dick, or this could be The Great Gatsby. I don't know, because it's all the same size. I like to have a sense of where I'm at when I'm approaching the end, and where I'm at in the arc of what's being taught. And so things like advanced organizers, I think, are worth the time, because I think they give your audience a sense of place in what you're presenting. It makes it easier to keep up and keep track. And for students, it hopefully keeps them from staring at the clock the whole time, because they know, hey, look it, we're on 4, there were only 5, we're almost done. So advanced organizers, I think, are a great addition and a good way to give yourself a place within your presentation, to connect to that prior knowledge, to orient your students so that the overall presentation is easier to take in. So that does bring us to the last bit of what I'm going to share with you before we have some questions. And that is, how does this work effectively, both in our face-to-face classes, but also in the online classes? How many of you teach online? I teach online, I teach face-to-face. How many of you exclusively teach face-to-face? A few people. Okay. So I think that you can take this idea of this claim evidence or claim support model and apply it in both ways, and as well as the idea of just making effective overall PowerPoint presentations. And a few ways I think you can do that is that, and I mentioned this earlier, that in a face-to-face class, taking the time to organize and structure your presentation slides in this manner helps you to organize your content effectively, rather than, again, just using your slide set as your visual and not sometimes very visually focused lesson plan. Okay, it makes you think about the way the audience is receiving the information rather than just the way that you're presenting the information. And so it makes it a lot more student focused and organized. And I think it also allows for the interactivity that PowerPoint can sometimes squelch. So when you have slides like this where everything you're saying or all the points you need to make are not on the screen, you feel a lot more free to talk about things not on the screen. You feel a lot more free to bring in other types of evidence in other ways, to bring up students to interact within the lesson. And I think that in a face-to-face classroom, these are more of a guide than something you feel trapped in and glued to. Okay, and they're just one, each slide is just one example of a piece of information and some evidence to support it, but not necessarily the only thing that you might bring into a class. I have students all the time that when they practice giving presentations in my course, they'll maybe do a live demonstration along with their PowerPoint. And they attempt to use the benefits of both of those two different mediums together. So I think that this structure helps with that. And I think it helps make you relevant as the instructor. And I think sometimes we make ourselves irrelevant to our own classes when we rely too heavily on our presentation software, or any tool for that matter. But in this type of model, the slides aren't going to make a lot of sense if you're not there to explain them. So if you think about writing in scientific sorts of argumentative models where you have your claim and you have your evidence and you have your reasoning, that you're the reasoning. Okay, your slide has your claim, your slide has a piece of visual evidence, and you are a necessary part of the process to connect the two together. Your presence and your explanation is what makes it work, and it's not going to work to hand these out as class notes after class when you create PowerPoints like this, because it won't make a lot of sense if you weren't present for the presentation, for the lecture, for the lesson. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing that our knowledge and our experience and our ability to explain and connect these things is essential to the process. And so that's why I think this is an effective way to use this in a face-to-face classroom. Yes?
How do you resolve your archival issues where you know, that was one of the things?
I make lesson plans too. I always would have accompanying notes
for me that aren't on the screen. I think sometimes it's really easy to fall into the, I just want to make one thing. And so I put it all on the PowerPoint. I show the PowerPoint to the students, but really a lot of the things on the screen are just my notes for me. So I use the note feature in PowerPoint that only I see, and that's where I put the information maybe in a bullet pointed list to remind myself, but it's not the things that students need to see. And it's too much for the students a lot of times, because I want them to make meaning out of what I'm saying rather than copying down everything that I wrote on the screen, or even kicking back and checking out because they think I'm going to give them the notes later. So I archive it in other ways. And if you want to use PowerPoint as a tool for making your teaching notes, great, just don't project it on the screen. Just use it for yourself as you're lecturing. But if you want to use it as a teaching tool, I think this is more effective.
Yeah, I use them for, students want to study guide.
Yep.
And we don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
Other than I said, well, then, I post these PowerPoints, go back and look at them.
Yep. And that is one way to do it. And you can do it that way. I don't do that because I want my students to go through the process of taking their own notes in my class and making meaning through the context of the lecturing process. And I would not provide, or if I did, I'd say, good luck with them. You may or may not get what you need out of it because I want students present. And if it becomes a situation where they don't need to be present because they know I'm providing the lecture notes after the fact, or if my main point of the PowerPoint is as lecture notes, then that's just a different kind of usage that I don't advocate because I want them to be present. I want to be relevant. I want the lesson to be necessary. Now, if they might need to get notes later, and maybe you want to use it for that tool in some way. But to me, that's a different type of presentation than the one you get to the class. Does that make sense?
If I could throw something into
Yeah.
that, for the class that I teach, we don't have the text.
Mm.
And so that's what I'm here
Yeah.
for, to try to figure out, well, how can I use my presentation
Yeah.
to also provide that written information for the students.
And I would look for more open source resources that are text-based to support and perhaps link to. But to me, it's a different usage than sort of the purpose of a presentation software. So if you need to do that and you need to provide a lot of written information, you might use this, but it isn't the same thing, isn't the same usage or purpose of using it as a visual aid to support a lesson. So, but let's talk about that in terms of an online class, because that's sort of the final idea here. So how would I use this model? Because in an online class, you're not physically present, right? So I use this to create engaging videos. So if I'm going to present a video lecture in an online class, I would use a very similar PowerPoint structure to the one that I've showed and I'm talking about, and I would narrate it. So they wouldn't necessarily see me, although you can put it up on a screen and teach it, and you can do it that way. But if I'm at home and I need to create a video and I want to use this, and I will sit at my computer and I'll just narrate these slides as if I was teaching you. I do the explanation just like I would be in class. Now that can lead to some accessibility issues. There's sort of a pendulum swing in accessibility where they're saying, no, put it all on the slide, then people can read it. And I would say, no, use captions on your video. Don't change what's effective for the majority of your students for the sake of a student that needs extra support. Add the features like captions to let those students be able to read the content too. But let the slides function in the way that the slides function best, and that is that visual aspect in a video. Because who wants to watch a video with a bunch of bullet points? It's tiring because you can't write stuff down as fast as it's coming at you. And it's not a really very good use of that kind of platform. Now, if you just put your slides and people can just go through them, then essentially you're just using PowerPoint as a way to present text. And that's fine. It's just not a presentation model. It's just another text-based feature. So I think in an online class that this is a great way to make engaging, simple videos that are easy for you to make at home, that effectively use that multimedia aspect of the online class and that allow you to share information with students in a way that they're going to be able to take in more effectively in the format of a video, which is constrained in its time, right? I mean, they can pause it and go back, pause it and go back, but if you can treat them like an audience that's sitting in your face-to-face class in terms of what they can take in the time that you are teaching it, then I think this helps you to do that a little bit better. Okay, well, we got started just a little bit late, but we're basically done. To sum up, I think that if you use it correctly, that if you implement a claim support model or something like that, where you use this as a visual aid and you present ideas in complete thoughts that are easy for students to grasp and rather than topics and bullet points, and you implement thoughtful design, that you be aware of the pitfalls and you lean into the strengths of the medium, that you can create a successful student engaging classroom experience that makes you a relevant and important part of that process. So I'm sure you have ideas, questions, objections. We'll take those, but I just was going to throw some references up here. If you want to access any references, the handout that I gave you, which again just has some reminders of some of the ideas, it has a link to an article online where these references are available. So you don't have to write them down, just follow the link to the one article. And it's an article on writingcommons.org that I wrote on this subject, and you can find all these references there. So questions? We have like a minute or two because we got started late, but any other thoughts or questions or objections? Yes?
Well, I would say just one thing too, when you're talking about locating images and captioning, things like that, don't forget that you have a lot of support on campus.
Yep.
If you're putting a course online, there's usually a department that helps you with that. And even if you decide to do it on your own, you can always contact someone and at least tell you like, hey, that image is good to use, and if it's not good to use, any recommendations on where you can find those.
You have a lot of resources available to you to do those extra features that maybe we are being a little bit lazy about, and we're trying to use our PowerPoints as a one catch-all. We want them to be, we're trying to take care of all of our accessibility issues. We're trying not to make problems with images. We're trying to do all these things, and then we end up with poor PowerPoints. But if we take advantage of the resources that are available, we can do it right and still have someone help us. Those students that caption things are amazing.
So another source for finding images, just if you do in a plain old Google search, is use the advanced search, and then you can check a box that says, show me things that have been okay for reuse or modification, and that way you're good. Or use Creative Commons search to do that same thing. If you're needing closed captions, then you can put your video on YouTube and then go to amara.org and get the captions edited for you.
Yes, because Google will caption, YouTube will caption your videos, and they're okay, but they often require some editing. Depends on probably how clearly you're speaking or how loudly or how much background noise, but at least you have a starting place just with YouTube captioning. Other questions? Things you disagree with? PowerPoint can be controversial.
I highly recommend the Gar Reynolds citation there. If you look up Gar Reynolds online, Garr Reynolds, he's got really good stuff there on.
That's this one, presentation then. It's a good book. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.